The year was 2009. Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo, was not burning with fire but with fury. In the middle of it all stood a man no one had expected to see in politics, Andry Rajoelina, a former DJ and a billboard entrepreneur. Just 2 years earlier, he was organizing concerts, running Viva TV and talking about youth empowerment. Now he was leading thousands of protesters through the street and shouting, TGV, Tanora Malagasy Vonona, determined Malagasy youth. The country's President Marc Ravalomanana had just shut down Rajoelina's TV station for airing a banned opposition broadcast. But that single act of censorship ignited something much bigger than media freedom. It ignited a revolution. Within weeks, protests erupted. Within months, the army mutinied, and by March, the unthinkable happened: a coup. Marc fled the country, and in his place, at just 34 years old, Andry Rajoelina became the youngest president in Africa. He had done what few in history have ever done. He rose from a turntable to a throne. But the very streets that lifted him up will one day bring him down. Because 16 years later, in 2025, those same chants of TGV returned. This time not in celebration, but in defiance. The young people who once saw him as the face of their revolution now saw him as the face of betrayal. Power cuts, inflation, broken promises, and finally the army that once crowned him turned its back. He fled the country under the same pressure that had once made him king. This is the story of Andry Rajoelina, the man who rose from DJ to president, built a movement, ruled a nation, tried to cure a pandemic, and ultimately fell victim to the same revolution he once led. It is a story of power, ambition, and the dangerous rhythm of African politics, where the beat of the street can crown a leader one day and dethrone him the next. Every revolution begins with a story, and for Andry Rajoelina, that story began not in the corridors of power, but under the neon lights of Madagascar's nightlife. Born on May 30th, 1974 in Antananarivo, Rajoelina was not born into politics. His father was a military officer and gave him discipline and ambition. His mother, a homemaker, gave him resilience. But the Madagascar of his youth was a country of contrast, rich in minerals and biodiversity, yet trapped in poverty and political instability. In the 1990s, while his peers were chasing government jobs, Rajoelina was chasing creativity. He became a DJ, spinning records under the stage name of Andrey TGV, a name that would later symbolize speed, energy, and rebellion. TGV, like the French high-speed train, became his personal brand. Fast, unstoppable, and forward-moving. It was a metaphor for his life. But Rajoelina's real genius wasn't in the boat, it was in business. In his 20s, he founded Injured, an advertising and event management company. At the time when Madagascar's urban landscape was still dull and quiet, he filled Antananarivo's skyline with giant billboards, posters, and concerts. Through Injured, he mastered something most politicians struggle with: visibility. He knew how to sell ideas, how to use color and slogan, how to control narratives. By 2007, at just 33 years old, Andry Rajoelina entered politics. He ran for mayor of Antananarivo, the capital city, on a populist platform. His slogan, Tanora Miara Mianga, Youth on the Move, resonated deeply with young people tired of corruption and unemployment. He won, and instantly, the city began to change. Under Rajoelina's leadership, Antananarivo saw urban renewal projects, cleaner streets, and public concerts celebrating youth and creativity. He spoke the language of the new generation, not in bureaucratic jargon, but in energy. To the youth, he was a symbol of hope, a cool, confident, and young mayor who could challenge the old order. But his rise also came with enemies. At the time, President Marc was consolidating power, building a reputation as both a successful businessman and a strongman. His administration had been accused of corruption and intolerance toward dissent. The media that criticized him were shut down, opponents were silenced, and journalists lived in fear. Then came the spark. In December 2008, Rajoelina's private channel, Viva TV, aired an interview with former President Rajoelina, who was living in exile. The government immediately shut down Viva TV, accusing it of undermining national security. The shutdown was supposed to silence Rajoelina. Instead, it made him a national symbol of resistance. By January 2009, protests had begun. Tens of thousands of people poured into the streets of Antananarivo. Many were young, jobless, and disillusioned. They wore t-shirts that read TGV, the youth will not stop. For the first time in years, the political tide was shifting, not because of ideology, but because of momentum. When soldiers opened fire on demonstrators on February 7, 2009, killing over 20 people, it was the point of no return. The army began to fracture, the street exploded in anger, and Rajoelina, once a DJ, became the accidental revolutionary. On March 17, 2009, President Marc resigned under military pressure, and in a stunning twist, power was handed over to Rajoelina. He was 34, Africa's youngest head of state. The world watched in disbelief. How could a man with no political experience, no military background, no elite lineage topple the president? The answer was simple. He understood the youth better than anyone else. But Rajoelina's victory was complicated. To his supporters, he was a hero, but to his critics, a usurper, and to the African Union, an outlaw. Madagascar was suspended, foreign aid was cut, and sanctions followed. But still, he ruled. And for a time, it seemed like Madagascar's youthful revolution might actually bring something new. When Andry Rajoelina took power in March 2009, Madagascar was not celebrating. It was divided, bruised, and uncertain. The African Union suspended the country for what it called an unconstitutional change of government. The Southern African Development Community, SADC, imposed diplomatic sanctions. Western donors, who provided nearly 70% of Madagascar's development budget, froze aid. It was a lonely start for the world's youngest president. Rajoelina called his administration the High Transitional Authority. His mission, at least on paper, was to prepare Madagascar for democratic election. But that promise quickly collided with realities of power. At home, he faced the political elite that saw him as an upstart. Abroad, he faced isolation. And on the street, the very youth who had brought him to power were growing restless for a change that never came. Still, Rajoelina pushed forward. He launched a populist campaign of moral renewal, promising to restore dignity, reduce corruption, and rebuild national pride. He visited schools, announced job programs, and declared that Madagascar will rise again. But the global boycott hit hard. Between 2009 and 2013, foreign investment fell by more than 60%. Tourism collapsed, and poverty rates surged from 68% to over 75% of the population. The Ariary, Madagascar's currency, lost nearly a third of its value. The irony was painful. The young man who came to power through a people's movement now presided over one of the worst economic contractions in the country's history. Yet, politically, Rajoelina was learning fast. He understood that power wasn't just about charisma, it was about survival. He began building alliances across factions, rewarding loyalists and sidelining critics. His speeches blended nationalism and optimism, calling on citizens to believe in the rebirth of Madagascar. By 2013, international mediators had brokered a deal for elections. But there was a catch. Rajoelina himself was barred from contesting as part of the peace agreement. He stepped aside, endorsing his ally, Andrey, who won the presidency in 2014. For the first time in years, Rajoelina was out of power, but not out of politics. He spent the next 5 years quietly rebuilding his base, touring the country, funding community projects, and staying visible through his TV station and social programs. And in that period, something remarkable happened. People began to miss him. By 2018, with economic stagnation, corruption scandals plaguing the government, the TGV brand was back in motion. Rajoelina returned with a message of redemption. He promised modernization, digital transformation, and what he called Initiative for the Emergence of Madagascar, IEM. A vision turned Madagascar into a prosperous, innovative, and self-reliant nation. That year, he contested the presidential election. And in January 2019, he won. 10 years after seizing power in a coup, Andry Rajoelina returned as a democratically elected president. To his supporters, it was vindication, completion of a cycle. To his critics, it was irony. The man who once broke democracy was now his chosen leader. But if his first time was about survival, his second will be about proving he could lead. Rajoelina began his presidency with energy and ambition. He spoke of turning the page on history. He promised to make Madagascar one of Africa's most dynamic economies by 2030. His administration unveiled a sweeping plan. The plan Emergence Madagascar, focused on industrialization, tourism, agriculture, and renewable energy. He launched projects that captured imaginations. One of his most visible was the construction of 13 new stadiums, one in each region, to promote sports and national unity. Another was the Villarano program, a list of 13 public commitments that included buildings of schools, hospitals, and roads. Rajoelina's government embarked on major infrastructural projects, road constructions and rehabilitation across key trade routes, renovation of airports in Nosy, Antananarivo, and Tomasina to boost tourism, electrification projects which expanded access to electricity from 15% in 2015 to nearly 30% by 2022, social housing program providing affordable housing for thousands of families. He also made education a central theme. Under his leadership, over 1,000 new schools were built. Teacher recruitment was expanded. He frequently said, "No nation develops without education." Madagascar's economy, under his early tenure, grew modestly, averaging 4 to 5% between 2019 and 2021, despite global instability. Foreign direct investment began to return. Tourism showed signs of recovery. Rajoelina seemed to have turned the tide. But then came the storm that will test every layer on Earth. In March 2020, COVID-19 arrived in Madagascar. The country with fragile health systems and limited testing capacity faced a crisis that could have been catastrophic. But Rajoelina chose an unconventional path. He announced that Madagascar had found a local remedy, COVID Organics, a herbal drink made from Temesia annua, a plant long used in traditional medicine to treat malaria. He presented it on national television, holding the bottle like a trophy. "This drink will change everything," he declared. "It will save our people and show the world that Africa can find its own solution." The tonic was distributed nationwide to schools, markets, hospitals, and even exported to other African countries. Rajoelina sent shipments to Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, and Tanzania. For a brief moment, he became a continental sensation, the African leader who defied global institutions and offered an African cure. But the celebrations didn't last. Scientists across the world, including the World Health Organization, raised concerns saying the drink had not undergone clinical testing. Critics accused him of promoting pseudoscience and ignoring medical expertise. Still, Rajoelina doubled down. He accused Western powers of undermining African innovation and declared that if it were a European country that discovered these, no one would question it. The COVID Organics controversy divided Madagascar. Some saw him as a visionary, others saw him as reckless. But politically, it worked. The move boosted his image at home. He became the leader who stood up to the West. The pandemic years also revealed another side of him, a growing authoritarian streak. Journalists were arrested for criticizing the government response. Protests were banned under public health laws. Opposition members were silenced in the name of national unity. By 2022, Madagascar's economy was battered. Lockdowns disrupted export, tourism collapsed, and nearly 1.5 million people slipped into poverty. Inflation rose to 9%, and unemployment, especially among youth, reached historic highs. Beneath the surface, anger was building. 2024, the shine was wearing off. The same man who once danced on stage with cheering crowds now faced the echo of an empty street and restless youth. Rajoelina's government had promised prosperity, Madagascar emergency. But what ordinary Malagasy saw were rising food prices, power blackout, and declining job opportunities. Inflation hit 9.4%, the highest in over a decade. Nearly 80% of the population lived below the poverty line. In rural areas, drought worsened hunger, while in cities like Antananarivo, young people queued for hours for scarce fuel. And in that despair, anger returned to the street. The same kind of anger that once brought Rajoelina to power. It started quietly. In early 2025, students protested at the University of Antananarivo over delayed scholarship and unpaid stipends. Then teachers joined, demanding better pay. Soon traders were marching over fuel shortages and tax hikes. Within weeks, the protest had a slogan: "The generation does not forget." Rajoelina dismissed the unrest as politically motivated. He accused foreign-funded groups of trying to destabilize the country. But the chants outside the presidential palace told another story, one of betrayal. By mid-2025, the protests had spread to different cities. Thousands took to the streets, civil servants went on strike, farmers blocked the highways. Then the army, the same institution that had once delivered him to power, began to fracture. Young soldiers refused to fire on protesters. Videos circulated of officers joining demonstrators, raising their fists in solidarity. A viral clip showed one saying, "We cannot shoot the people we sought to protect." On October 13, 2025, Rajoelina made a televised address. His tone was defiant yet strained. He warned of an intentional conspiracy, vowed to restore order, and called for calm. But it was already too late. That night, the Chief of General Staff, once his staunch ally, withdrew the army's support. By dawn, military convoys surrounded the presidential palace, not to protect him, but to demand his resignation. Rajoelina fled the capital, reportedly first to Nosy-Be, then aboard a private plane to Mauritius. Within 24 hours, Parliament convened an emergency session and voted to impeach him. And just like that, Andry Rajoelina, the youngest president in Africa's history, became the first to fall twice. His rise had begun with youth protest on the street. His fall ended with youth on the street. It was poetic and tragic. Rajoelina's story is not merely about Madagascar. It's about the paradox of modern African leadership. He embodied the hopes of post-independence generation. Young, ambitious, and unapologetically modern. A leader who could speak the language of both politics and pop culture. He was the first African president born after independence. His very rise symbolized a generational shift. From liberation-era politicians to a new class of leaders shaped by media, business, and technology. But in the end, he fell into the same old traps, centralizing power, sidelining critics, and mistaking popularity for legitimacy. His decade in power offers three key lessons, not just for Madagascar, but for Africa as a whole. The first lesson: charisma cannot replace institution. Rajoelina ruled through personality, not process. He saw himself as the engine of the state. But when institutions are weak, the collapse of trust in one man can bring the whole system down. The second lesson is populism feeds on hope but dies on delivery. He promised a new Madagascar, but when that vision collided with economic reality, hope turned to resentment. Across Africa, similar leaders from Uganda to Guinea have learned that slogans alone cannot outlast hunger. And the third lesson is the youth who make you can unmake you. In 2009, they carried him to power. In 2025, they carried him out. The African youth today are politically aware, digitally connected, and less patient than any generation before them. They may dance to your campaign songs, but they also record your failures. So, how should history remember Andry Rajoelina? As a visionary, a populist, a tragic figure caught between ambition and reality? Perhaps all three. He was a leader of contradictions, a DJ who became a president, a revolutionary who became the establishment, a reformer who clung to power until it broke him. Under his rule, Madagascar modernized parts of its economy, expanded electricity access, and invested in infrastructure. Yet it also became more unequal, more fragile, and more dependent on foreign aid than before. He defined the idea of youth leadership, proving that young people could seize power, but also reminding them of how easily that power corrupts. In the words of one Malagasy journalist after his fall, Rajoelina's story is not about one man's failure. It's about our struggle to believe that change is enough. Some call him a visionary who dared to dream, others call him the man who mistook a slogan for strategy. But one thing is certain: Andry Rajoelina changed Madagascar forever. He was both the spark and the smoke. And in the end, his rise and fall say something bigger about Africa itself. That the continent's revolution no longer comes from generals or ideologues, but from ordinary young people tired of waiting, tired of promises, and determined to make history, even if it means unmaking their heroes. Thank you for watching this episode. Share this with someone, and until I see you again, bye bye.
On répond à la sollicitation du peuple malagasy en fait. Après la répression de la gendarmerie, on essaie de montrer au peuple malagasy que l'armée n'existe pas. On répond à la sollicitation, à l'appel du peuple. Il n'y a pas de coup d'État.